Well, good afternoon. I'm Steve Acuff, the Republican candidate for U.S. Congress, 4th District in North Carolina. Welcome to my headquarters. We're trying to show some pictures and some things on the wall to get you oriented on what we're looking at. This is a picture of the airplane. It's a 707-300 that we were using at the time. It was Air Force Two, flying Mr. Al Gore at that time, the Vice President, to various places in Russia and other places. Up above that, I was also qualified in the C-9 with the top left picture there. Flew Mrs. Clinton around in that airplane on occasion, mostly in stateside runs. Part of the duties as the Vice Commander of Andrews Air Force Base was to meet and greet the President when he came and went from, in this particular picture, walking from the airplane, escorting him to the helicopter before he would depart the base. We'd usually do that about three or four times a week, depending on the President's schedule. We'll come on in here to the other office. Fortunate enough to have a shadow box made just before I retired, made by my executive officer, just showing some of the principal medals and awards and the rank, the pilot's wings, and then the flag that flew at the base. After 30 years, it was very tough to try to get everything into one shadow box, but then everybody knows how that is if you've had any experiences along those lines. I have a picture over here that was given to me by my wife. My father supposedly was the 5th tank into Bastogne when George S. Patton relieved the 101st Airborne there around Christmas of 1944. And so this picture shows Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams leading the charge into Bastogne. And the picture has a very special meaning because of Dad's time driving that tank. Show you one other area here. These pictures are T-38s, which are the primary jet trainer at the time that Air Force pilots were training on. I had a 4-year tour in the training command as an instructor in T-38s. Great opportunity to fly like driving a sports car. This picture I had made over in Taiwan. My brother-in-law at the time was a Navy flyer flying F-4s, and this shows an F-4 and a MiG-21 in aerial combat. I had a little plaque on it that used to say MiGs were born to die, and I gave that to Lieutenant Commander Ken Pritchard. He was killed at a later time in a mid-air collision. And these, of course, are the flying scarfs from various flying units that I was a part of, and then the various coins from various organizational units, some of which I served in, some of which I served with. Just a coin check was a very standard procedure for an Air Force or an Army officer. What I'd like to talk about just for a second, though, has to do with some of the events that have transpired in our country now, especially while we're at this global war on terror and some of the implications there. One of the biggest differences between us and our Democratic opponents is how we consider this war. And I want to tell you that I consider this one of the most, if not the most serious things our country's facing right now. And part of the reason is that most Americans don't see it that way. Back in the summer I put out a press release basically where I wanted an investigation of the New York Times. You might recall the New York Times published a story concerning the National Security Administration's, NSA's terrorism monitoring program. I would liken this to the World War II if the New York Times had published the fact that we had broken the Japanese naval codes. I have no doubt in my mind that the president at the time would have shut the place down and probably jailed the reporters and the editors, as well he should have. This NSA eavesdropping program has served us well, did very good things for us during the, recently in the London potential bombing schemes that were broken up. But now it's been exposed, and the enemy that we are fighting is a very, very cunning and very smart. There was a story back in the late 1990s, I believe it came out of Germany, but the story told about the particular cell phone that Osama bin Laden was using, the brand name satellite phone. And within 24 hours of that story appearing on the streets, bin Laden had gotten rid of that phone and no longer used it. So again, an excellent opportunity at intelligence was missed. The enemy is not the enemy is very smart, and he adapts and changes to conditions. What I find treasonable is that the New York Times would publish this and give our enemy an edge. They know about it. If they know about it, they can adjust, as I'm sure they have. And this is not about the citizen's right to know. And again, this eavesdropping is not on the average citizen. This is on people with known Al-Qaeda phone numbers and specific words. And obviously, I'm sure the situation is not as simple as I'm leading it to be. And there are a lot of things to consider here. I asked my opponent, Mr. David Price, to join me in calling for an investigation into the New York Times in this incident. Obviously, none of that has happened. He did not even reply to my request. I believe, though, in the freedom of the press, but the press should use some common sense, especially during a time of war. Not only has the New York Times jeopardized and compromised national security efforts, but they've also jeopardized international cooperation. I find it most ironic that the paper criticized the Bush administration for not doing more to track the finances of terrorists several years ago. I guess the Bush administration did not seek the approval of the New York Times at that point, and now this is payback. I feel very strongly about this because this 24/7 news cycle that we're part of and technology, which is great. We need information, there's no doubt about it. But what that allows is it allows a lot of people to get an opportunity to air their views on national and ultimately international audiences. And those views may or may not be right. The information they're passing out may or may not be right, but there is no control over it. And I'm not advocating censorship, to be sure. But I am advocating that there needs to be more responsible and some more responsibility by journalists, more responsibility by some of our elected officials who feel perfectly at ease to stand up and criticize our president. And I realize that part of that is the democratic process. But also they need to realize that they can make very outrageous statements that within 2 hours can be playing on Al Jazeera or one of the other Middle Eastern country TV stations, either edited or unedited. And I'm afraid that our opponents, our enemies, do not share our love of Jeffersonian democracy, and they will use that against us. And so the very words by a senior elected official, which may be nothing more than political dissent over here, can very much be taken as aid and comfort to the enemy, who will use those very things against us. I think that is wrong. We need to be aware of that. Thank you for your time.